The year was 1875, and the Montana Territory was as wild as it got. Weren't nothing but sagebrush, rattlers, and bad men for 100 miles when they found the wagon train. 23 good folk massacred, their worldly possessions scattered like leaves in the wind, all dead, except for one, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell. Jim Hawkins discovered her 3 days later, half dead and walking the prairie like a lost soul. Now, Jim wasn't the kind of man to get mixed up in other folks' troubles. His own past had taught him better than that. But something about her story didn't sit right with him. Weren't no ordinary outlaws behind this massacre, and them, what did it were, still out there. Could a broken woman and a lone cowboy find more than just vengeance in the wild frontier? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The torn bonnet caught Jim's eye first, half buried in prairie dust, its once blue ribbon now stained dark with something he didn't care to examine too close. His horse, Buck, had spotted her before he did, ears pricking forward at something. Moving through the tall grass. Weren't natural the way she walked, like someone sleeping but upright, heading nowhere with purpose. "Miss," he called out, keeping his distance. These days a man couldn't be too careful, even with what looked like a helpless woman. When she didn't respond, he nudged Buck forward, moving slow and steady, like approaching a spooked Mustang. She wore what had once been a fine dress, now torn and caked with mud. Her dark hair hung loose around shoulders that looked too thin for the weight they carried. As he drew closer, he could see her feet were bleeding through what remained of her boots. "Miss," he tried again, softer this time, "you need help?" She stopped then, swaying like a reed in the wind. When she turned, her eyes were the color of faded cornflowers, but they looked straight through him like he wasn't there at all. Jim had seen that look before, back in the war. The 1,000-yard stare, some called it. The look of someone who'd seen too much and couldn't make sense of living anymore. He dismounted, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The charred remains of a family Bible clutched against her chest caught his attention. The only possession she seemed to have. Saved. "I'm Jim Hawkins," he said, pulling his canteen free. "Got some water here if you're thirsty." Her cracked lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at the canteen like she'd never seen one before. "It's all right," he coaxed, holding it. "Out. Take it slow now." Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the Bible tumbling to the ground. Jim caught it before it hit the dust, and something between a sob and a scream tore from her throat. "No!" The first word he'd heard from her was raw with panic. "Please, it's all I have left." "Here now," he said quickly, offering the Bible back. "Didn't mean no harm, just didn't want it getting more damaged is all." She snatched it back, clutching it like a shield between them. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, probably no more than 20. Pretty, too, under the dirt and fear. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, after she'd taken a few sips of water. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice rough as saddle leather. "Sarah Mitchell." Jim nodded, keeping his face neutral, even as his gut twisted. He'd heard talk in the last settlement about a wagon train headed north, the Mitchells among them. 23 souls setting out for Oregon Territory, hoping to start fresh. Now he knew what had become of them. "You been walking long, Miss Mitchell?" Her eyes grew distant again. "The sun's gone down 3 times, or maybe 4. I can't remember anymore." Jim fought back a curse. 4 days alone out here, no food, barely any water. It was a miracle she was still standing. "There's a settlement about 2 days' ride from here," he said carefully. "I can take you there, get you some help." Sarah's fingers tightened on the Bible. "They're still out there," she whispered. "The men who ain't nothing gonna harm you now," Jim said firmly, though his own hand drifted closer to his gun belt. "You got my word on that." A bitter laugh escaped her, sharp as broken glass. "Your word? Like the word of those men who said they just wanted to trade, who smiled and broke bread with us before they—" Her voice cracked and she swayed dangerously. Jim moved without thinking, catching her before she could fall. She went rigid in his arms, but she was too weak to pull away. "Easy now," he murmured. "Just easy." She smelled of smoke and prairie dust, and beneath that, something floral, like the lavender his mama used to dry and keep in her dresser drawers. The thought caught him off guard, stirring memories he'd rather leave buried. "I can't go back," she whispered against his shoulder. "There's nothing, no one left to go back to." "Then we'll go forward," Jim said simply, helping her toward Buck, one step at a time. As he lifted her into the saddle, he noticed a strange mark burned into the leather of the Bible's cover, a symbol he hadn't seen in years, one that made his blood run cold, but now wasn't the time to speak of it. The girl was at her breaking point, and the prairie sun was climbing higher. They rode west, Sarah's slight form slumped against his chest, the Bible still clutched tight against her heart. Behind them, a hot wind stirred the prairie grass, carrying with it the faint, acrid scent of smoke from somewhere distant. Jim touched the gun at his hip, a habit born of hard experience, and urged Buck on faster. Some mysteries were better left for stronger days. Right now, the girl needed shelter, food, and rest. The rest, including why a particular gang's brand was marked on her family Bible, would have to wait. Jim's Winchester rifle lay across his lap as he kept watch in the gathering dusk. The old weapon had been his father's, passed down along with words he couldn't forget if he tried. "Son, there's them that cause trouble, and them that end it. Choose careful which you aim to be." Sarah slept fitfully beneath his spare blanket, her face troubled even in rest. He'd found a sheltered spot between two rock formations, defensible if need be. The girl had barely managed to swallow a few bites of jerky before exhaustion claimed her. The Bible sat between them, that strange brand seeming to mock him in the firelight. 5 years since he'd seen that mark, 5 years of trying to forget what it meant. The Crow's Wing gang didn't leave survivors. Yet here she was. The question was why? Buck nickered softly from where he was picketed, and Jim's hand tightened on the Winchester. But it was just a coyote, its lonely howl echoing across the prairie. "No," Sarah murmured in her sleep, turning restlessly. "Please, no." Jim shifted uncomfortably. Wasn't right, hearing such fear in a young woman's voice. Reminded him too much of another time, another woman he couldn't save. "You're safe now, miss," he said quietly, though he knew she couldn't hear. The words were more for himself anyway, a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The smart play would be to get her to the settlement and ride on. He'd learned the hard way that a man's past had a way of catching up to those around him. But something about this didn't sit right. The Crow's Wing gang never did anything without purpose, and that brand on her Bible meant something. Sarah bolted upright with a strangled cry, her eyes wild in the firelight. "Easy," Jim said, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're safe. Nobody here but me." She stared at him for a long moment, getting her bearings. I'm sorry. The dreams ain't nothing to be sorry for." He offered her his canteen. "Drink some water." Her hands were steadier now as she took it. "You should have left me. That ain't the way I was raised." "And how were you raised, Mr. Hawkins?" There was a sharpness to her voice now, fear giving way to something harder. "To rescue helpless women? To play the hero?" "Was raised to do what's right," he said simply, "even when it ain't easy." She laughed, a sound with no mirth in it. "Right and wrong don't mean much out here. I learned that lesson well enough." Jim studied her over the fire. The shock was wearing off, leaving something raw behind. Good. She'd need that steel to survive what was coming. "Them men," he said, carefully. "The ones that attacked your wagon train, they have a mark, like the one on your Bible there?" Sarah went still. "You know them. Known of them. Crow's Wing gang. Mean bunch of outlaws. They killed everyone," she whispered. "Everyone. Except me. They made me watch, and then they—" Her voice broke. Jim's hand tightened on the rifle until his knuckles went white. "You don't have to tell me. Their leader, he had eyes like ice. He said I was to deliver a message, but I ran. I ran and ran until I couldn't remember what the message was supposed to be." A message. That explained the survivor, but not why they'd chosen her. The Crow's Wing gang liked their messages written in blood, not carried by trembling girls. Listen to me, Miss Mitchell. Those men, they ain't just outlaws. They're organized, connected. If they're sending messages, it means something big's brewing. Why are you telling me this? Because he needed her to understand what they were dealing with. Because he needed her to be prepared. Because maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to finally make things right. "'Cause you got a choice to make," he said. "I can take you to the settlement tomorrow, get you passage east, somewhere safe, or we figure out what they're planning. Stop it before more folk end up like your family." Sarah's fingers found the Bible, tracing the brand. "You're asking me to help you hunt them. I'm offering to help you find justice. Your choice." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she looked up, there was something new in her eyes, something that made Jim think of steel fresh from the forge. "Tell me everything you know about them, Mr. Hawkins." "Everything." Jim nodded slowly, knowing he'd just crossed a line there. Was no stepping back from. He'd sworn never to get tangled up in this kind of business again, but maybe his father had been right. Sometimes a man didn't choose trouble. Trouble chose him. "First light," he said, checking his Winchester's action. "We'll talk then. For now, try to rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Sarah settled back, but this time her eyes stayed clear and focused on the stars above. Jim kept his watch, the old rifle across his lap, wondering if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, or finally set right a wrong that had haunted him for 5 long years. Dawn painted the prairie in shades of blood and gold when they approached the massacre site. The circled wagons still stood like ancient ruins, their canvas covers flapping like tattered ghosts in the morning breeze. Sarah sat rigid behind Jim. On Buck, her fingers digging into his coat. "We don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes," she answered, her voice steadier than he expected. "We do." They dismounted at the perimeter. Jim's eyes caught details his years as a lawman had, taught him to notice. The strange pattern of the wagon circle, the way the ground had been disturbed. Something wasn't right about any of it. "Your people," he said carefully. "They were headed to Oregon." Sarah nodded, clutching her Bible close. "The Willamette Valley. Father had a letter from his brother there, telling of good farmland." Jim knelt by a wagon wheel, examining the ground. "These tracks here. Your train had been stopped a while before it happened, hadn't they?" 2 days, Sarah whispered. They said they were prospectors, needed supplies. Father always believed in helping folks in need." The bitterness in her voice cut like a knife. Jim moved slowly through the site, reading the story, written in blood and brass. Spent cartridges lay scattered about, more than he'd expect from a simple robbery. And the brands, he found them burned into the wagon's wood, same as the one on Sarah's Bible. "This wasn't chance," he muttered. "They planned this." A glint of metal caught his eye. Half buried in the dirt lay a silver pocket watch, its case dented but intact. Jim recognized the maker's mark, same as the ones the Crow's Wing gang's leader had given all his lieutenants 5 years back. "Miss Mitchell," he called, "you remember any of them wearing watches? Nice ones, silver?" She closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. The leader. He kept checking his watch, like he was waiting for something. Jim pocketed the watch, his suspicions growing. The Crow's Wing gang didn't waste time on random wagon trains. They were methodical, strategic. This massacre had a purpose, one that went beyond simple robbery. "Your father," he said, choosing his words carefully. "What did he do before deciding to head west?" Sarah's brow furrowed. "He was a banker in St. Louis." "Why?" The pieces started falling into place. "These tracks here, riders coming from the north, at least 15 of them. But look here." He pointed to another set of tracks. "These came from the east. Maybe 3 riders met up with the others. What does that mean?" "Means this wasn't just a gang of outlaws happening across a wagon train. This was coordinated. They knew you were coming." Sarah swayed slightly, and Jim steadied her with a hand on her arm. "But how? Why?" Before he could answer, Buck whinnied a warning. Jim's hand dropped to his gun as he scanned the horizon. There, a dust cloud to the southwest, moving fast. "Riders coming," he said, quietly. "Time to go." They mounted quickly, but Sarah pulled something from the wreckage first, a small tin-type photograph, miraculously unburnt. "My family," she explained, tucking it into her dress. "I couldn't leave them here. Not again." Jim urged Buck north, away from the approaching riders. His mind worked furiously, connecting threads he'd thought long buried. A banker from St. Louis, the Crow's Wing Gang's particular interest, that silver watch with its distinctive maker's mark. "Miss Mitchell," he said as they rode, "I need you to think careful now. In the days before you left St. Louis, did your father act strange at all? Worried about anything?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then, "He was in his study late most nights. I heard him arguing with someone once. About papers, I think. He burned everything in his desk the night before we left." Jim's jaw tightened. It was worse than he'd thought. Your father wasn't just a banker, was he? He knew something they wanted. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the Crow's Wing Gang doesn't leave survivors by accident. They wanted you alive for a reason. That message you were supposed to deliver, it wasn't just a message. You're carrying something and don't even know it." Sarah clutched her Bible tighter, realization dawning in her eyes. "Father gave me this the morning we left. Said to keep it safe no matter what." Jim glanced back at the dust cloud, now falling behind them. "When we make camp tonight, we need to take a closer look at that Bible. Something tells me your father hid more than just prayers in those pages." They rode hard through the morning, the weight of new questions heavy between them. Jim had thought he'd left this life behind. The conspiracies, the hidden motives, the dangerous games of powerful men. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The sun climbed higher, and somewhere out there, men with silver watches were closing in. Time, Jim knew, was running out. Jim's ranch appeared like a mirage through the heat waves rising off the prairie, a weathered cabin nestled against rocky hills, with a corral and small barn built from rough-hewn logs. It wasn't much, but the deed in his strongbox proved it. It was his, bought with years of honest work after hanging up his badge. "Ain't exactly what you're used to," he said as they approached, "but it's defensible. Good sightlines in all directions." Sarah straightened behind him, taking in the isolation. "You live here alone?" "Just me and the horses," he patted Buck's neck. "Prefer it that way most times." The cabin's interior was spare but clean. A stone fireplace, rough wooden table with 2 chairs, narrow bed in the corner. Jim's Winchester. Rack hung on the wall beside a small shelf of books that surprised Sarah. "You read?" she asked, running a finger along the spines. "Man's got to do something during the long winters." He busied himself starting a fire, not meeting her eyes. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the hearth." Sarah clutched her Bible tighter, the brand on its cover seeming to burn against her palms. "We should look at it now. Whatever father hid?" "Food first," Jim said firmly. "Been a long ride." He fixed a simple meal of beans and salt pork while Sarah washed up at the pump outside. When she returned, some of the trail dust was gone from her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Jim found himself wanting to promise her everything. Would be all right, but he'd learned long ago not to make promises he couldn't keep. "Your deed," Sarah said suddenly, nodding toward the strongbox on a high shelf. "You mentioned it was earned honest." Jim stirred the beans. "Asking if I was always on the right side of the law. Were you? Wore a badge for 8 years. U.S. Marshal out of Kansas Territory." He served up 2 plates, his movements precise. "Dealt with the Crow's Wing Gang back then. Almost had them too." "What happened?" Jim's face darkened. "Found out some badges ain't as honest as others. Gang had protection, high up. Lost good men trying to bring them down." Sarah picked at her food. "And now?" "Now I mind my own business. Or tried to, at least." He glanced at her Bible. "Reckon that's about to change." After they'd eaten, Sarah placed the Bible on the table between them. Jim lit a lamp, its glow catching the silver of his marshal's badge where it lay hidden in. the bottom of his strongbox, some things you never could quite leave behind. She opened the Bible carefully, pages crackling. Jim watched her fingers trace the familiar passages, searching for anything unusual. Then she paused, frowning. These pages, they're different. Jim leaned closer. Several pages in Psalms felt thicker, as if they'd been glued together. And there, so faint he almost missed it, numbers written in pale ink in the margins. Bank numbers, Sarah whispered. Account ledgers. Father was... A horse whinnied outside, not Buck's familiar sound. Jim was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. Back room, he said quietly. There's a trap door under the rug. Any trouble you... Get in there and stay quiet. Sarah gathered the Bible, but before she could move, a voice called from outside. Coming in friendly, Jim. It's Wade Farley. Jim relaxed slightly, but kept his gun ready. Wade's the local law, he told Sarah. Man I trust most in these parts. He raised his voice. Come ahead, Wade. The door opened to reveal a weathered man in a sheriff's badge. His eyes went straight to Sarah, then to Jim with a question in them. Got ourselves a situation, Jim said simply. Wade nodded slowly. Reckon you do. 3 riders been asking after a young woman, carrying some mighty official-looking papers from St. Louis. Jim's hand tightened on his gun. That right? Said she's wanted for questioning about her father's business dealings, something about missing bank funds. Wade's eyes were careful. Didn't tell them I'd seen you ride this way with a lady friend. Sarah's face had gone pale. Father wasn't a thief. Never said he was, Wade replied gently. But them riders, they're mighty interested in that Bible you're holding. Jim moved to the window, scanning the darkening prairie. How far behind you were they? Half-day's ride, last I saw. Heading this way. Wade adjusted his gun belt. Thought you might want to know. Jim shared a long look with his old friend. Appreciate the warning. Wade tipped his hat to Sarah. Ma'am. He turned to go, then paused. Jim, them riders, they're wearing mighty fine silver watches. After Wade left, Jim began pulling supplies from a chest. Extra ammunition, dried food, basic medical supplies. We'll need to move soon. Can't risk them finding us here. Sarah stood straighter, steel in her spine. I won't run forever, Mr. Hawkins. No, he agreed, checking his gun. But we'll run tonight. Tomorrow we start hunting them instead. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of a storm. Jim looked at his home, everything he'd built to escape his past, knowing it might be the last time he saw it standing. But when he met Sarah's determined gaze, he knew he'd made the right choice. Some things were worth more than a quiet life. They rode through the night, following game trails and dry creek beds where their tracks wouldn't show. Sarah dozed against Jim's back, one hand clutching her mother's locket, a simple silver oval she'd kept hidden beneath her collar. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, her parents on their wedding day, young and full of hope. Just before dawn, they made camp in a sheltered canyon. Jim built a small fire, keeping the flames low to minimize smoke. Sarah sat close to its warmth, the locket open in her palm. Tell me about them, Jim said quietly, offering her coffee. Sarah traced her mother's face with a gentle finger. Mama loved music, used to sing hymns while she worked, said it made the day go faster. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Father would pretend to complain, but I'd catch him humming those same songs in his study. Jim settled beside her, careful to keep some distance between them. Good memories. Does it ever stop hurting? Her voice was barely a whisper. This empty feeling inside? Jim stared into the fire, remembering other losses, other griefs. No, but you learn to carry it. Gets lighter with time. Sarah closed the locket with a soft click. I keep thinking I'll wake up, that this will all be some terrible dream, and I'll hear Mama singing again. Ain't no shame in grief, Jim said. Shows the love was real. She looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing past the quiet strength to something wounded underneath. You've lost people too. It wasn't a question, but Jim nodded anyway. Wife and daughter. Fever took them 6 years back. He hadn't spoken of them in so long. The words felt rusty in his mouth. Clara was just 4. Lucy, my wife, She held on longer, trying to stay with us. Sarah's hand found his in the growing light. Her fingers were cold, but they warmed something inside him that had been frozen for years. That's why you left the Marshal Service. Partly because of what happened with the Crow's Wing Gang. Lost my family. Lost my faith. In the badge, seemed easier to just ride away. Until now, Sarah said softly, until now. They sat in companionable silence as the sun crept over the canyon walls. Jim was acutely aware of her hand still in his, of the trust that simple touch represented. "I've been thinking about Father's papers," Sarah said finally. "The numbers in the Bible. He wasn't just recording transactions, he was tracking something." Jim nodded. "Money moving where it shouldn't. Your father was an honest man in a dishonest business. The bank's connections to the gang, more than likely, explains why they wanted him quiet." Jim squeezed her hand gently before letting go. "Question is, who's really behind it all?" Sarah reached for the Bible, but her hands were shaking. When she spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. "I keep seeing their faces, the men who killed them all. I close my eyes and they're there." Without thinking, Jim pulled her close. She stiffened for a moment, then melted against him, silent sobs shaking her slight frame. "Let it come." He murmured into her hair, "Ain't no one here but me." She cried then, really cried, all the grief and fear and rage pouring out of her. Jim held her through it, offering what comfort he could, remembering how it felt to break apart and try to put yourself back together. When the storm passed, she didn't pull away immediately. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "Ain't nothing to thank me for." Sarah sat up, wiping her eyes. In the morning light, with her guard down, she was beautiful in a way that made Jim's chest ache. "We should move soon," he said, more gruffly than he'd intended. "Need to stay ahead of them." She nodded, but caught his arm as he stood. "Jim?" It was the first time she'd used his given name. "Yes, I'm glad it was you who found me." He tipped his hat, hiding the emotion in his eyes. "Best get moving, Miss Mitchell. Long ride ahead." But as they broke camp, Jim knew something had shifted. Between them, like a key turning in a lock he'd thought would stay forever closed. They found the wanted poster tacked to a tree near an abandoned mining camp. Jim tore it down before Sarah could see it, but not fast enough. $500 reward, she read over his shoulder, for information leading to the apprehension of Sarah Mitchell. Wanted for questioning in connection with the theft of bank documents and conspiracy to... Jim crumpled the paper. "Ain't worth the ink it's printed on. They're trying to make me look like a criminal." Her voice shook with anger. "Like I'm the one who..." "Standard procedure," Jim cut in. "Crow's Wing Gang's got friends in high places. Turn the victim into the villain, make it harder for them to find help." But something about the poster nagged at him. The language was too precise, too legal, and that signature at the bottom, Judge Marcus Blackwood. Jim knew that name from his marshal days. "We need to make a stop," he said, mounting up. "Place about 3 hours from here. Man who might have some answers." They rode hard through the afternoon, Sarah asking no questions when Jim led them off the main trail onto a narrow deer path. The trees grew thicker, the undergrowth more tangled, until they emerged in a small clearing dominated by a ramshackle cabin. "Stay behind me," Jim warned, drawing his gun. "And if I say run, I'm not leaving you." The steel in her voice made him smile despite himself. "Just stay ready." He approached the cabin slowly, noting the fresh wood chips by the chopping block, the smoke from the chimney. "Jack, got words need speaking." A moment of silence then. "That you, Hawkins? Thought you was done with official business." "Ain't official, personal." Another pause. "Come ahead then, slow and easy." The cabin door creaked open to reveal a grizzled man with a shotgun and an eye patch. His good eye widened at the sight of Sarah. "Well, hell," Jack Winters said softly, "you done got yourself mixed up in it after all." Inside, Jack poured 3 fingers of whiskey and pushed the glass toward Jim. "Figured someone had come asking eventually, ever since I heard about that wagon train." "You knew?" Sarah demanded. "Knew something was coming. Didn't know what? Jack settled into his chair. With a grunt. Been watching the gang's movements. They've changed, more organized, taking orders instead of just causing chaos. Jim leaned forward. Orders from who? Ever hear of the Western Capital Investment Company? Big outfit. Jim nodded. Banking. Railroads, mining interests, run by a board of directors, all respectable businessmen. Jack's voice dripped sarcasm, including one Judge Marcus Blackwood. Sarah's hand went to her Bible. Father's bank. It was examining their books. He said something about irregularities. More than irregularities, I'd wager. Jack pulled a stack of papers from beneath a loose floorboard. Been collecting these? Banking records, land deals, all tied to the company. Pattern of buying up failed businesses, foreclosed farms, but the failures ain't natural. Jim's jaw tightened. They're using the gang to create opportunities. Sabotage, threats, murder when needed. Drive folks out, buy cheap, sell high. Jack spread the papers out. Your father was tracking the money, wasn't he, miss? Sarah nodded, opening her Bible to the hidden numbers. These match some of your records. Whole territories being carved up, Jack continued. Railroads coming. Land that's worthless today will be worth fortunes tomorrow. Your father found proof of what they were doing, and they killed 23 people to keep it quiet, Jim said softly. Not just to keep it quiet. Jack fixed his good eye on Sarah. To send a message to anyone else thinking of looking too close at their business. A cold wind rattled the cabin windows. Outside, a horse whinnied. Jack moved faster than his age suggested, grabbing his shotgun. You were followed. Jim was already on his feet, gun drawn. Back door? Through the root cellar. Tunnel comes out by the creek. Jack pressed a packet of papers into Sarah's hands. Take these. Proof of what they're doing. Names, dates, connections, all the way to Washington. Jack, Jim started. Been waiting years to bring these bastards down. Jack checked his shotgun loads. Ain't dying for nothing now. Horses in the yard. Men's voices. Go, Jack commanded. I'll buy you time. Sarah clutched the papers and her Bible. Thank you. Girl, Jack called as they reached the cellar door. Your father was a brave man. Did what was right. You remember that. Jim met his old friend's eye one last time. No words needed saying. They descended into the cellar as the first shots rang out above. Sarah's hand found Jim's in the darkness as they hurried through the narrow tunnel, the sound of gunfire gradually fading behind them. The papers in Sarah's hands might be enough to bring down an empire of corruption, but the cost of truth, Jim knew, was rarely paid in mere dollars. It was paid in blood. The telegram had been waiting at the drop point Wade had arranged, a hollow tree 3 miles from Jack's cabin. Jim read it by the last light of day, his expression grim. Crow's wing moving north. Stop 30 riders strong. Stop. Judge Blackwood. With them stop, God's sake be careful. Stop Wade. Thunder rolled in the distance as Jim crumpled the paper. Storm's coming. They'd pushed the horses hard since leaving Jack's, following the creek until it widened into a river. Now they huddled beneath an overhanging rock shelf as the first heavy drops fell. Will Jack be all right? Sarah asked, wringing water from her hair. Jim's silence was answer enough. Lightning split the sky, illuminating their shelter in harsh white flashes. Sarah shivered, and Jim shrugged off his duster coat, draping it around her shoulders. Your father's numbers, he said, nodding to the Bible she clutched. They match anything in Jack's papers. Sarah spread the documents carefully, shielding them from the rain. More than match. Father was tracking millions in stolen money, land deeds, railroad contracts, bribes paid to territorial officials. Enough to hang them all, if we can get it to the right people. She looked up at him. You still have friends in the Marshal Service? A few. Man named Cooper in Denver. He's honest. Got connections in Washington. Jim checked his ammunition. 2 days hard ride if we push it. Sarah's fingers traced the Bible's weathered cover. And if we don't make it, we'll make it. How can you be so sure? Jim turned to her then, his face softened by something more than just the dim light. Because I ain't losing anyone else to these bastards, not you, not after. He trailed off, but Sarah understood. Slowly, giving him time to pull away, she reached up and touched his cheek. His skin was rough with stubble, but he leaned into her touch like a man starved for gentleness. "Jim," she whispered. Lightning crashed directly overhead, making them both jump. Their faces were inches apart, and in that brilliant flash, Jim saw everything he'd been trying not to feel written plain in Sarah's eyes. "This ain't the time," he said roughly, but didn't move away. "When is it ever the right time?" Her hand was still on his cheek. "Tomorrow, we might be dead, Sarah." She kissed him then, soft and quick, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she waited any longer. Jim stayed perfectly still for a heartbeat, fighting a battle with himself. Then his arms were around her, pulling her close, kissing her like a drowning man finding air. Thunder rolled again, closer now. They broke apart, both breathing hard. "I'm sorry," Sarah started, but Jim shook his head. "Don't be. He ran a hand through his wet hair. "Things are complicated enough without..." Hoofbeats on the ridge above, barely audible over the storm. They froze, pressed back against the rock face. Jim's hand found his gun while Sarah gathered the precious documents. "How many?" she breathed. "3, maybe 4, moving slow in the rain." A voice carried down to them. "Tracks lead this way. Spread out." Jim made a quick decision. "River's our best chance. Water'll hide our trail." "It's flooding. Better than bullets." He checked his gun one last time. "Stay close to me. When I say run, you run. No arguing." Sarah's chin lifted. "Together or not at all." Something swelled in Jim's chest. Pride, fear, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. He kissed her again, hard and fast. "Together." Then they waited for the next lightning flash, then broke cover. The rain was coming sideways now, cutting visibility to almost nothing. They splashed through the shallows toward the deeper channel where their horses waited. A shout from above. Gunfire. Sarah stumbled, but Jim caught her arm, keeping her upright. They reached the horses just as another lightning bolt turned night to day. For a split second, Jim saw their pursuers on the ridge, dark shapes with rifles raised. "Ride!" he yelled, practically throwing Sarah onto Buck's back. He swung up, behind her as bullets kicked up water around them. They plunged into the river's main channel, the current grabbing at them like hungry hands. Sarah clutched the Bible and documents to her chest, while Jim guided Buck with his knees, gun ready. Behind them, more shots. Ahead, the thunder of rapids. Sarah turned her head, her lips close to Jim's ear. "Together." He tightened his arm around her waist. "Together." They rode into the storm, two hearts beating as one against the gathering dark. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. Jim spread the territory map on a sun-warmed rock, its creased surface marked with ink dots showing known crow's wing hideouts. They'd survived the rapids, lost their pursuers, but both knew it was temporary at best. "Your friend Wade's telegram said they're moving north." Sarah traced the line of the river with her finger. "But why? Denver's east of here." "Because they don't know we have Jack's papers yet." Jim tapped a spot on the map. "This here's their main camp. Judge Blackwood won't risk riding into Denver until he's sure all the evidence is destroyed." They dried the documents as best they could after the river crossing. Now Sarah laid them out beside the map, creating a pattern of corruption and blood that stretched across the territory. "Look at these dates," she said, pointing to her father's notes in the Bible. "Every major land purchase follows a pattern. First, the gang creates trouble, then the bank forecloses. Finally, the Western Capital Investment Company purchases at a fraction of true value." Jim nodded grimly. "And 2 weeks after your father discovered the pattern, they murdered my family." Sarah's voice was steel. "But they made a mistake leaving me alive. Mistake's gonna cost them everything." Jim studied the map again. "Main camp's 2 days' ride, but there's a smaller outpost here, about 6 hours north. Might find something useful." "Like what?" "Gang that organized needs to communicate. Messages, schedules, proof of who's really giving orders." He glanced at her. But it'll be dangerous. Sarah checked the revolver Jim had given her, her hands steady. I stopped being afraid of dying the day they killed my family. Ain't about fear. Jim's voice softened. It's about living. Your father died trying to expose these men. Living to finish what he started. That's the real revenge. Their eyes met, the morning sun painting Sarah's face in gold. The kiss they'd shared in the storm hung between them, unspoken but not forgotten. Then we do this smart, she said finally. Tell me the plan. Jim pulled a brass spyglass from his saddlebag. Outpost is in an old mining camp, usually 3, maybe 4 men stationed there. They'll have horses, supplies, and, if we're lucky, documents about their operations. How do we get in? You ever wear trousers, Miss Mitchell? An hour later, Sarah emerged from behind a stand of bushes wearing Jim's spare clothes, her hair tucked up under a battered hat. The clothes were too big, but with her gun belt slung low and her natural grace, she made them work. You'll pass for a young buck at a distance, Jim said approvingly. Long enough for us to get close anyway. They rode north, following game, trails to avoid the main paths. Jim taught her hand signals, the silent language he'd used in his martial days. By noon, they could communicate basic messages without speaking. The outpost came into view mid-afternoon. Jim studied it through, his spyglass noting the 2 horses in the corral, the smoke from the chimney. 2 men, he murmured, both armed, one sleeping on the porch. Sarah touched the gun at her hip. I'm ready. Remember, if anything goes wrong, you ride for Denver. Find Marshal Cooper. The documents are what matter. Nothing's going wrong. She touched his arm. Together, remember. Jim wanted to kiss her then, but duty came first. Instead, he squeezed her hand and gave the signal to move. They approached from the blind side of the cabin, using the afternoon sun to their advantage. 20 yards out, the sleeping man stirred. 15 yards, and Jim could see playing cards on the porch table. At 10 yards, a dog started barking inside the cabin. "Company!" a voice yelled. Everything happened at once. The sleeping man came up shooting. Jim shoved Sarah behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood around them. She returned fire with surprising accuracy, keeping the second man pinned. In the doorway, Jim's first shot took the sleeper in the shoulder. His second caught the doorway shooter in the leg. In moments, it was over. "Clear!" Jim called, approaching the wounded men with his gun ready. Sarah emerged from cover, her father's Bible still secure in her shirt. She looked different now, not just the clothes, but the way she moved, like she'd crossed some invisible line between who she was and who she needed to be. They found what they were looking for in a strongbox under the floorboards. Letters, orders, schedules, all bearing the Western Capital Investment Company letterhead. And something else. A list of names, men bought and paid for in every major town from St. Louis to San Francisco. "This is it," Sarah breathed, reading. Through the papers, everything father was trying to prove. Jim finished tying up the wounded men. "We need to move. Once these 2 don't report in." "Already happening, lawman," one of them wheezed through bloody teeth. "Signal fire's been lit. Crow's Wing'll be here by sunset." Jim and Sarah shared a look. No need for hand signals now. They grabbed what supplies they could carry and mounted up. The hunters were about to become the hunted again, but this time they had what they needed. The real battle was just beginning. They made camp in a box canyon as the last light faded, the walls rising steep enough to prevent any approach except head-on. While Sarah tended the horses, Jim pulled an old U.S. Marshal's badge from his saddlebag, its silver surface dulled with age and memories. "Found something at the outpost you should see," he said when she joined him by the small fire. He passed her a wanted poster, yellow with age, but still legible. It showed a younger version of himself, stern-faced in a marshal's coat. "James Hawkins," Sarah read, "wanted for questioning in relation to the death of Judge Michael Reed. Jim, what is this?" He turned the badge over in his hands, watching firelight dance across its tarnished surface. 5 years ago, I was closing in on the Crow's Wing gang, had evidence linking them to 3 territorial judges, dozens of corrupt officials. Judge Reed was the worst of them, taking bribes, ordering killings, helping the gang operate free. Sarah settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. What happened? Night before I was set to present my evidence, Reed turned up dead, shot with a marshal's gun. His jaw tightened. They planted evidence, made it look like I'd done it. By morning I was the one being hunted. But you were innocent. Didn't matter. Gang had friends everywhere. My own partner turned on me, said he'd seen me near Reed's house that night. Jim's voice was bitter. Lost my badge, my reputation, nearly lost my life. Sarah took the badge from his hands, studying it. That's why you left. Why you built that ranch so far from everything. Thought I could just disappear, leave it all. Behind. He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the fire's glow. Till I found you. And now we're fighting the same battle your evidence could have won 5 years ago. Jim nodded slowly. Different players. Same game. Judge Blackwood's taken Reed's place, but the scheme hasn't changed. By the law, use the gang to do their dirty work, build their empire on blood money. Sarah's fingers traced the badge's edges. My father, he didn't just stumble onto their operation, did he? He was looking for it. Looking for proof of what happened to you. What makes you say that? She pulled out her father's Bible, opening to a page they hadn't examined before. There, pressed between the leaves, was a newspaper clipping about Jim's case. He believed in justice, she said softly, believed one honest man could make a difference. That's why they killed him. Not just for what he knew, but for what he planned to do with it. Jim's hand found hers in the darkness. Your father was a brave man. So are you. She pressed the badge back into his palm. And you're not alone anymore. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then Sarah leaned in and kissed him, not with the desperate passion of their storm-swept embrace, but with something deeper, something that felt like a promise. When they parted, Jim kept hold of her hand. Sarah, if we make it through this, when, she corrected firmly, when we make it through this, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. When we make it through this, I ain't going back to that empty ranch. No? Been thinking maybe it's time to stop running, time to build something new. He met her eyes steadily, something worth fighting for. Sarah's free hand cupped his cheek, thumb tracing a scar there. Are you asking me something, James Hawkins? Reckon I am, though timing could be better. I think the timing is perfect, she smiled, and for a moment the weight of their mission lifted. Yes. Above them, stars wheeled in the vast Montana sky. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, its own dangers. The gang would be hunting them, and Denver was still days away. But for now, in this quiet canyon, two souls found anchor in each other. Jim's badge lay between them, its silver surface catching starlight. No longer a symbol of loss and betrayal, but of something else. Redemption, perhaps, or hope. After all, even in the darkest night, dawn was always coming. The forged documents lay spread before them in the grey light of dawn. Land deeds, bank drafts, and letters bearing Judge Blackwood's signature. Jim had found them hidden in the outpost strongbox, tucked beneath the other papers. Look at these. Dates, Sarah said, arranging them in sequence. Every major land grab followed the same pattern father found. But there's something else here. Jim leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers. What do you see? These forgeries, their insurance. The gang keeps proof of every crime their powerful friends order. If anyone tries to betray them, they can prove the judges and bankers were behind it all. Jim's expression hardened. Smart. Means nobody can turn on them without going down. Themselves. A cold wind whistled through the canyon, making their small fire dance. Sarah pulled Jim's coat tighter around her shoulders, studying the territory map they'd marked with the gang's movements. They're gathering here. Jim pointed to a spot near the Montana-Dakota border. 30 riders, according to Wade's telegram. Probably more now. Why there? There's nothing but empty prairie for miles. Nothing yet. Jim traced a line across the map. But the railroad's coming through. Land that's worthless today will be worth fortunes once the steel goes down. Judge Blackwood's company's been buying up everything in their path, through theft and murder. Sarah's voice was cold. And now they're planning something big. Jim tapped the location again. This many riders, the judge himself coming. They're not just running from us. They're setting up their next move. Sarah studied the papers again, her father's banker's mind finding patterns. These land purchases, they form a corridor. If someone controlled all this territory when the railroad came through, they'd control every route west. Jim nodded, grimly. Could bleed the railroad dry, charge whatever they wanted for right-of-way. So they're not just stealing land, they're trying to steal the future and killing anyone who gets in their way. Sarah's hand found her father's Bible. Fingers tracing the gang's brand burned into its cover. How do we stop them? We're only 2 against 30. Jim was quiet for a moment, rolling a cigarette with practiced fingers. When I was a marshal, learned something about taking down bigger forces. Ain't about numbers. It's about leverage. What kind of leverage do we have? He lit the cigarette, the match flare illuminating his face. We've got proof that it'd hang half the powerful men in the territory, got witnesses who can testify about your father's murder, and most importantly, we've got their insurance papers. Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. If these got out, every man who ever worked with the gang would be exposed, including Judge Blackwood. Jim smiled grimly. Man like that, facing disgrace and a hanging judge, might just turn on his friends to save himself. So we don't need to fight them all. We just need to get to the judge. Won't be easy. He'll be surrounded by gunmen, protected day and night. Sarah checked her revolver, the action smooth after Jim's teaching. Then we make them come to us, set a trap. Jim studied her face in the growing light. The frightened girl he'd found wandering the prairie was gone, replaced by something harder, something dangerous. Got an idea about that, he said, but it's risky, real risky. Tell me. He outlined the plan, watching her expression carefully. When he finished, Sarah was silent for a long moment. If it goes wrong, she started. I won't let it, Jim. She touched his arm. If it goes wrong, I want you to promise me something. Promise you'll make sure these papers reach Marshal Cooper, that everyone knows what they did, what my father died trying to expose. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. Nothing's going wrong. We started this together. We'll end it together. Sarah leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. I believe you. God help me. I do. They sat watching the sunrise paint the canyon. Walls, each lost in thought. The papers that could destroy an empire of corruption lay before them, and somewhere out there, 30 killers were riding hard under a judge's orders. When this is over, Sarah said softly, I want to see the ocean. Jim smiled, remembering. Younger dreams. Never been myself. We could go together. Build that new life you talked about. Might have to learn to swim first. Her quiet laugh warmed something in his chest. We've got time. But they both knew that first. They had to. Survive the next 2 days. Had to spring their trap and hope it didn't snap shut on them instead. Jim checked his Winchester one last time. The weapon that had seen him through so many fights. Best get moving. Long ride ahead if we're going to set this up right. They packed quickly, efficiently, like partners who'd been riding together. For years, instead of days. The forged documents went into Sarah's saddlebags, wrapped in oilcloth. The future they dreamed of would have to wait. First came justice. First came blood. Sarah's silver cross caught the midday sun as she rode alone into Timber Creek, its tiny Episcopal church rising stark against the Montana sky. The settlement was barely more than a dozen buildings, but its location was perfect for their plan. 1. Rode in, mountains at its back, and clear lines of sight in all directions. Jim watched through his spyglass from the ridge above as she dismounted at the church. They'd chosen Sunday for a reason. Even the worst elements in the territory thought twice about spilling blood on holy ground. Usually, Sarah disappeared inside. The church, right on schedule. Even at this distance, Jim could see the same silver cross he'd given her that morning, taken from Lucy's old jewelry box. His wife had worn it every Sunday until the fever took her. Now it served a new purpose. Making Sarah visible, memorable, making sure word would spread. Mighty interesting place for the Mitchell girl to be hiding. Jim didn't turn at the voice. He'd been expecting company. Afternoon, Marshal Phillips. His old partner stepped up beside him, badge glinting. 5 years, Jim. Long time to hold a grudge. Ain't about grudges, about justice. Justice? Phillips spat. You killed Judge Reed, turned your badge dirty. Now you're running with a wanted woman. That what Blackwood told you? Jim kept his voice casual, though his hand stayed near his gun. Same way he told you to plant that evidence 5 years. Back, Phillips stiffened. You always did talk too much. Got proof now, real proof. About Reed's murder, the gang's operations, everything. Jim finally turned to face his former friend, including your part in it. Proof's worthless if you're dead. Already sent copies to 3 different marshals' offices. Anything happens to me or the girl, it all comes out. A lie, but a necessary one. Way I figure it, you got 2 choices. Help us bring down Blackwood and the gang, maybe save your own neck. Or go down with them. Phillips was quiet for a long moment. In the distance, church bells began to toll. Blackwood's got 30 men riding this way, he said finally. They'll burn that whole town to get to her. That's what we're counting on. Understanding dawned in Phillips's eyes. It's a trap. Question is, which side you want to be on when it springs? Before Phillips could answer, a rider appeared on the road below, kicking up dust as he raced toward town, right on time. Looks like word's spreading about our Sunday visitor, Jim said mildly. Reckon it'll reach the gang by nightfall. Phillips drew his gun but kept it pointed at the ground. You're betting awful heavy on Blackwood taking the bait. Man like that? Built his empire on looking untouchable? Can't let a slip of a girl with proof of his crimes stay alive. Jim checked his Winchester. Pride'll make him come himself. Greed'll make him bring overwhelming force. And you got something waiting for all 30 of them? Jim smiled grimly. Got something waiting for everyone who needs justice? The church bells fell silent. Below, Sarah emerged briefly to tend to her horse, the silver cross gleaming like a beacon. She's awful calm for bait, Phillips observed. Ain't bait. She's the trap. Jim turned to his old partner one last time. Sun's setting, Thomas. Time to choose your side. Phillips holstered his gun slowly. Always were a persuasive bastard, Jim. He sighed heavily. Tell me what you need. As Jim outlined the plan, more riders appeared on the horizon. Word was spreading faster than expected. Soon Timber Creek would be swarming with the gang's scouts, all reporting back that Sarah Mitchell was alone and vulnerable, seeking sanctuary in a house of God. By tomorrow, Judge Blackwood himself would come, bringing his army of killers to silence the last witness to his crimes. They'd find Sarah Mitchell waiting with proof that could destroy them. What they wouldn't find, not until it was too late, were the 24 honest lawmen Jim had quietly contacted over the past month, all converging on Timber Creek from different directions. Wouldn't spot Wade's men positioned in the hills with rifles, or the telegrams already sent to newspapers across the territory, ready to expose everything if anything happened to Jim or Sarah. The silver cross gleamed below, a beacon of hope and vengeance both. Jim touched Lucy's wedding ring, which he still wore on a chain around his neck. Almost done, love, he whispered. Almost made it right. The trap was set. Now came the hard part. Surviving when it snapped shut. Inside the empty church, Sarah found a folded piece of paper beneath the pulpit where Jim had left it. A letter, written in his strong, simple hand. She settled into a pew to read it. Lucy's silver cross cool against her throat. Sarah, if you're reading this, our plan's in motion, and there's no turning back. There's things that need saying in case tomorrow goes wrong. Things a man ought to say face to face, but sometimes the writing comes easier than the speaking. Before I found you on that prairie, I was a dead man walking. Lost my badge, my family, my purpose. Built that ranch thinking I could hide from the world, but really I was hiding from myself, from what I knew needed doing. You changed that. Not just by bringing me this chance at justice, but by showing me what real courage looks like. Watching you face your grief, choose to fight instead of break. It woke something in me I thought was gone forever. I know tomorrow's dangerous. No, I'm asking more of you than any man has right to ask, but I also know you're the strongest person I've ever met. Whatever happens, remember that. If we make it through this, I mean to make good on everything we talked about. The ocean, the new life, all of it. If we don't, know that you gave me back my heart when I thought it was dead forever. Keep your eyes sharp and your powder dry. Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, feeling her own heart beat strong and steady. Through the church windows, she could see riders coming and going from the town, carrying word of her presence to the gang. Everything proceeding exactly as planned. She thought of her father, of his quiet determination to expose corruption no matter the cost. "I see now why you couldn't let it go," she whispered. "Some fights choose us." The Bible lay open beside her, its marked pages containing enough evidence to destroy the gang's entire operation. But it wasn't just evidence anymore. It was her father's legacy, his final gift to her, a chance to finish what he'd started. Moving to the church's back room, she checked her guns again, just as Jim had taught her. The weight of them felt natural now, like they'd always been part of her. The frightened banker's daughter she'd been seemed like a lifetime ago. "Your girl's drawing quite a crowd." Sarah spun, gun ready, but it was only Wade in the doorway looking trail-worn. "Any trouble getting your men in position?" she asked, holstering her weapon. "All set. 20 good rifles in the hills, more coming." He studied her face. "You sure about this? Still time to ride for Denver." Sarah touched the silver cross. "I'm sure." Wade nodded slowly. "Jim's a lucky man." "We make our own luck," she said, remembering Jim's words from their training sessions. "And tomorrow we make justice." After Wade left, Sarah returned to the church proper. Sunset painted the windows in shades of red and gold, like the stained glass back in St. Louis, where she'd attended services every Sunday of her life. Before the blood and the terror and the long walk through the wilderness of grief, but that walk had led her to Jim, to purpose, to love. She took out paper and pen, beginning her own letter while light remained. "My dearest Jim, you say I gave. You back your heart, but you gave me something just as precious. You gave me back my strength, showed me that surviving isn't enough, that justice matters, that love can bloom even in the darkest places. Tomorrow we face the devils who took my family. Part of me is afraid, but a bigger part feels nothing but ready. Ready to end this, ready to begin whatever comes after. You talk about making good on our plans for the future. I plan to hold you to that. We've earned our ocean, you and I. Until morning, Sarah." She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her Bible next to Jim's. Tomorrow would bring violence and judgment, but tonight was for quiet truth, for putting into words the things that lived in their hearts. Outside, more riders arrived as darkness fell. The trap was nearly ready. Sarah checked her guns, one final time, then knelt to pray, not for mercy or deliverance, but for strength, for justice, for love. Dawn would come soon enough. The gang leader's journal had been brought to Jim by one of Wade's scouts just before midnight, a leather-bound book taken from a dead courier. By lantern light, Jim read through its pages on the ridge above Timber Creek, each entry confirming their worst suspicions. June 15th. Judge B confirms railroad route, says to clear the corridor by whatever means necessary. Mitchell problem handled. Loose ends remain. June 20th. 30 new land deeds secured. Owners made proper arrangements after demonstration of consequences. Judge B pleased with progress. June 28th. Mitchell girl still missing. Judge B most displeased. Says evidence must be recovered at all costs. Territorial governor asking questions. July 2nd. Multiple parties now hunting the girl. Judge B offering significant bonus for proof of elimination. Secondary target James Hawkins also to be handled permanently. The final entry was dated yesterday. Full operation. moving to Timber Creek. Judge B accompanying personally. Girl reported. In church seeking sanctuary. Time to end this embarrassment. Jim closed the journal, his jaw tight. Below, Timber Creek was coming alive with activity. Riders had been arriving all night, hard men with hard eyes, taking up positions around the town. He counted at least 40 now, more than they'd expected. Quite a gathering down there. Marshal Phillips emerged from the shadows, followed by 3 more lawmen Jim recognized from his marshal days. Good men, honest men. Judge riding in at dawn, Phillips continued, got a telegram from his advance party. He's bringing 10 more guns with him. 50 against our 30 then, Jim said. Quietly. 31, came a new voice. They turned to see Sarah approaching, dressed again in Jim's spare clothes, with her hair tucked up under a hat. I can shoot as well as any of them now. She moved differently in the dark, Jim noticed. Confident, dangerous, the silver cross still hung at her throat, but she wore it now like a soldier's medal. Got news, she said, joining them. Wade's men intercepted a rider. The gang's got the town surrounded, but they're waiting for dawn. Judge Blackwood wants to make a show of it. Course he does, Phillips spat. Man like that, it ain't enough to win. Has to be seen winning. Jim shared a look with Sarah. Everything they'd planned depended on Blackwood's pride, his need to appear untouchable even while doing his darkest work. Your men ready? He asked Phillips. In position, got sharpshooters in the bell tower, others. Spread through the buildings, rest are hidden in the hills with Wade's boys. Phillips paused. It's a good plan, Jim. Might even work. It'll work, Sarah said firmly. It has to. They gathered around as Jim laid out the final details. The gang would try to take the church at dawn, expecting to find Sarah alone and frightened. Instead, they'd face armed resistance from multiple directions. In the chaos, Jim and Sarah would get to Blackwood himself, the head of the snake. Remember, Jim told the assembled lawmen, we need him alive. Man like that, facing the gallows, he'll turn on his friends to save his own neck. Give us the names of every corrupt judge and official in his pocket. And if he doesn't? One of the lawmen asked. Then we've still got the evidence, Sarah said, touching her father's Bible where it rode in her shirt. One way or another, their empire falls today. As the lawmen dispersed to their positions, Sarah caught Jim's arm. I need to show you something. She led him to the church's small cemetery. There, in the fresh-turned earth, she'd added 2 crude wooden crosses. For my parents, she said softly. Seemed right, them being here for this, being part of setting things right. Jim took her hand, feeling the gun calluses that now matched his own. Your father would be proud of both of us, she said, squeezing his fingers. We should try to rest. Long day coming, but they both knew sleep would be impossible. Instead, they sat in the church doorway, watching the false dawn begin to paint the sky. Sarah's head rested on Jim's shoulder, his arm around her waist. They could have been any young couple waiting for Sunday service to begin, except for the guns at their hips, except for the vengeance in their hearts. Jim, Sarah whispered as the stars began to fade, if anything happens to me, don't. Listen. If anything happens, promise me you'll see it through. Promise me they won't get away with it. He turned to face her, cupping her cheek in his rough hand. Nothing's happening to you. We started this together, remember? Together. She echoed and kissed him like it might be the last time. Above them, the church bell began to toll, marking the hour before dawn. In the growing light, they could see dust on the horizon, Judge Blackwood and his personal guard, riding to what they thought would be an easy victory. The trap was set. The storm was about to break, and 2 hearts beat as one, ready for whatever came with the dawn. Judge Marcus Blackwood's pocket watch struck 6 as he rode into Timber Creek, its gold case gleaming in the dawn light. He was a tall man, elegant even after days in the saddle, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. 10 hand-picked. Gunmen rode with him, joining the 40 already surrounding the church. Sarah stood alone in the doorway, her father's Bible clutched to her chest. From his hidden position in the bell tower, Jim's hands tightened on his Winchester. Everything hinged on these next few moments. "Miss Mitchell," Blackwood's voice carried across the empty street, smooth as fresh-poured whiskey. "I must say, you've led us quite a chase." "Wasn't much choice," Sarah called back, "after what you did to my family. A regrettable necessity. Your father was unreasonable about certain business matters." The judge dismounted, straightening his coat. "But I'm a reasonable man. Surrender now, return what you've stolen, and I promise your death will be quick." Sarah's laugh was bitter as creek water. "Like you promised those homesteaders, the ones your gang burned out to clear the railroad's path?" Blackwood's smile faded. "I see you've been busy, learning things beyond your station." He gestured to his men. "Bring her out, and find that Bible." 4 gunmen started forward. In the bell tower, Jim sighted down his rifle. Not yet, had to wait for the signal. The first rays of sun struck the silver cross at Sarah's throat, making it flare like a star. Now, Jim's shot took the lead gunman in the shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Before the others could react, rifles blazed from a dozen hidden positions. Wade's men in the hills, Philip's lawmen in the buildings, the trap was sprung. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed, men dove for cover, guns thundered from every direction. Through it all, Sarah stood in the church doorway, calm as Sunday morning. "Kill her!" Blackwood bellowed, drawing his own gun. "Kill them all!" But his men were caught in a crossfire, unable to advance or retreat. Jim picked off 2 more, trying to circle behind the church. Below him, Sarah had drawn both revolvers, holding the church steps with deadly accuracy. "Your empire's finished." "Judge!" she shouted over the gunfire. "We have proof of everything, every crooked deal, every murder, every man you've bought." "You have nothing!" But there was fear in Blackwood's voice now. "Your own gang kept records." Sarah's words cut through the smoke. "Insurance, they called it. Protection against the day you might turn on them. Smart men, you're killers." A bullet struck the church wall near her head. She didn't flinch. "It's over," she continued. "Marshal Cooper in Denver has copies of everything, more evidence arriving by telegraph as we speak. Senators, governors, territorial officials, they'll all hang with you." Jim saw the change come over Blackwood's face, saw the moment when pride cracked and survival took over. The judge looked around wildly, seeing his men falling, the trap closing. "Hold your fire!" Blackwood suddenly shouted. "Hold! Perhaps we can negotiate." That was Jim's cue. He emerged from the bell tower, rifle trained on the judge. Other lawmen appeared from their hiding places, weapons ready. "Only negotiation is how much you tell us," Jim said, descending the church steps. "Names, dates, details of every operation might keep you from the rope." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Marshal Hawkins, should have known you'd be involved." "Should have known better than to leave survivors," Jim replied. "Stand down, Judge! Order your men to surrender!" For a moment, it seemed Blackwood would comply. Then his hand moved fast as a striking snake toward his coat. Sarah saw the Derringer appear, saw it aim at Jim. Without thinking, she fired. The tiny gun went flying as Blackwood clutched his bleeding hand. Jim's rifle pressed against his chest, rock steady. "That was stupid," Jim said softly. "Now decide, die here or live to testify." The fight went out of Blackwood like air from a punctured lung. Around them, his men were throwing down weapons, surrendering to Phillips and the other lawmen. Sarah approached, keeping her gun trained on the judge. From her shirt, she drew out her father's Bible. "You killed 23 good people to keep. Your secrets," she said, her voice steel. "Now you'll live to watch everything you built crumble." Blackwood's cold eyes met hers. "You think this ends with me? There are others, girl. Men with—" "That's enough talking," Jim said mildly. "Phillips, get some irons on him." As the lawman secured Blackwood and his surviving men, Sarah finally lowered her guns. Her hands were steady, but Jim could see her trembling inside. He reached for her just as she reached for him. They came together like storm clouds meeting, all the fear and fury and relief pouring out in desperate embrace. "Together," Sarah whispered against his chest. "Together," Jim agreed, holding her close as the sun rose over their victory. The judge's broken pocket watch lay in the dust nearby, its hands frozen at the moment justice finally caught up with him. Time enough now for healing, for rebuilding, for love. The new family Bible lay open on the church altar, its pages pristine and waiting to be filled. Sarah had bought it in the general store that afternoon, after the prisoners were secured and the dead were buried. "For new beginnings," she told Jim as they sat in a front pew, tending each other's wounds. His arm had caught a bullet's graze, her shoulder was bruised from recoil, but they were alive. They were together. "First thing we'll write in it," Jim said, wincing as she wrapped his arm, "is our wedding date." The church was quiet now, though hours before it had echoed with gunfire. Through the windows, they could see Marshal Phillips and his deputies organizing prisoners for transport to Denver. Judge Blackwood sat apart from his men, broken and silent. "He's been talking," Phillips had told them earlier. "Names, dates, locations, everything. Man's desperate to save his own neck. Sarah's father's old Bible, with its hidden numbers and bitter memories, lay wrapped in cloth nearby. Its work was done. The evidence it contained, combined with Blackwood's confession and the gang leader's journal, would unravel decades of corruption. "Wade sent more telegrams," Sarah said, tying off Jim's bandage. "Marshals are moving on Judge's friends in 3 territories. It's really over. Your father would be proud." Jim caught her hand, kissed her palm. "You finished what he started." "Who did?" She leaned against him, careful of his wounds. "Though I'm not sure I like the cost." 6 good men had died in the fight, their graves fresh in the churchyard. The price of justice was always paid in blood. Through the open door came sounds of the town returning to life. Shopkeepers sweeping broken glass, children playing in the streets again, life flowing back like spring water after winter. "Reminds me of something Lucy used to say," Jim murmured, "about how healing's like sunrise, can't rush it, but it comes sure as anything." Sarah touched the silver cross at her throat, thinking of the woman who'd worn it before her. "Tell me about her." "About both of them." Jim was quiet for a moment, gathering memories. Clara loved horses. Could never pass the livery without stopping to pet everyone. Lucy'd make up stories about each of them, where they'd been, what adventures they'd had. He smiled, and for the first time the memory held more sweet than bitter. They'd have liked you, Lucy especially. She always said one stubborn woman was worth 10 regular men. Sounds like a wise woman. She was. Jim looked at the new Bible. Maybe we write their names first. Remember the good souls who helped bring us here. Sarah opened to the family pages, her pen scratching gentle in the quiet church. Clara Hawkins. Beloved daughter Lucy Hawkins, beloved wife Thomas Mitchell, beloved father Mary Mitchell, beloved mother. She paused, then added, Jack Winters, friend and truth seeker. Room for more names soon, Jim said softly. New ones, happy ones. Sarah's free hand drifted to her stomach, where new life might one day grow. I'd like that. Outside the sun was setting, painting the church windows in colors like healing bruises. Tomorrow would bring more work, testimonies to give, telegrams to send, justice to see done. But tonight was for quieter things. Preachers coming back tomorrow, Jim said. Could do it then if you want. No need for fancy preparations. Sarah turned to face him fully. James Hawkins, are you properly asking? Me to marry you? He smiled, caught. Reckon I am. Though I seem to remember you already said yes up in that canyon. That was before we knew we'd survive. That mean you're changing your mind? She answered him with a kiss, soft and sure as sunrise. When they parted, Jim pressed his forehead to hers. I ain't got much to offer except a broken-down ranch and a whole lot of love. Got the ocean too, Sarah reminded him. You promised. That I did. He stood, offering his hand. Better get some rest. Big day tomorrow. They walked out into the evening air, the new Bible tucked safe under Sarah's arm. The street was mostly empty now, townsfolk gone home to their suppers and their lives. But here and there, lights gleamed in windows. Children's laughter floated on the breeze. Simple sounds, healing sounds, sounds like hope. The marriage certificate bore their names in fresh ink, the paper still crisp and white beneath the official seal. Sarah traced the letters with gentle fingers as they rode away from Timber Creek, the morning sun warm on their backs. James Robert Hawkins and Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell joined in holy matrimony this 17th day of July, 1875. The ceremony had been simple, just them, the preacher, and a handful of friends who'd fought beside them. Wade and Philip stood as witnesses, while the townsfolk filled the little church with wildflowers and well-wishes. "Never seen a bride wear a gun belt to her own wedding," Wade had joked. "Never seen a bride who could outshoot half the men in." "The territory neither," Phillips added with respect. Sarah had worn her mother's locket and Lucy's cross, the old and new coming together like the lives they were joining. Jim had cleaned up proper, though he'd kept his gun close too. Some habits die hard. Now they rode west toward Jim's ranch and whatever future lay beyond. The papers they'd carried, heavy with evidence and accusations, were safely on their way. To Denver with Phillips. Judge Blackwood and his surviving men rode with them, headed for justice. "Penny for your thoughts," Jim said, watching Sarah study their marriage certificate. "Thinking about names," she replied. "All the ones I've been, daughter, survivor, avenger, now wife." She smiled at him. "Somehow they all fit together right. Speaking of names." Jim reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a weathered wooden sign. "Thought maybe we could add yours to this." It was the sign from his ranch, Hawkins' ranch, carved in simple letters. He'd taken it down before they'd left to spring their trap, not knowing if they'd ever return. "Might need a bigger sign," Sarah mused, "if we're going to build something new." They rode on through the morning, the familiar landmarks of Jim's property, now their property, coming into view. The cabin looked smaller somehow, like it too was ready for change. "We'll add on here," Jim said as they dismounted. "Maybe a proper bedroom, room for a family when we're ready." Sarah touched the cabin's rough walls, remembering that first night they'd sheltered here when she'd been running from ghosts and he'd been hiding from his past. "But not yet," she said softly. Jim wrapped his arms around her from behind. "No, first we see the ocean like we promised." They'd already made plans. Once the trial was over and their testimony given, they'd take the new railroad line to California. See the Pacific waves, feel the salt wind, begin their life together proper. But for now they had this moment, this homecoming. Inside, Sarah placed their marriage certificate in a simple frame Jim had made. Beside it, she set a tintype photograph taken just after the ceremony, the two of them looking worn but happy, guns still at their hips, love plain on their faces. "Quite a story we'll have to tell our children," she said, arranging the photos. "Just so, quite a legacy too." Jim hung his gun belt on its peg, then helped Sarah with hers. "Justice, truth, standing up when it matters. Love," Sarah added, turning in his arms, finding it in the darkest places. He kissed her then, soft and sweet as morning light. When they parted, both were smiling like they had secrets to share. Outside, Wade's men were still riding patrol, watching for any of Blackwood's allies who might seek revenge. But those threats felt distant now, like storm clouds on a far horizon. They had dinner on the porch, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs now. Not just Jim's refuge or Sarah's hiding place, but their home, their future. "I've been thinking," Sarah said as stars began to appear, "about what we build here. Oh, not just the ranch, though we'll make it proper with gardens and good horses." She leaned against him, sharing warmth as the evening cooled. "But maybe we could help others too. People running from their own dark times, needing somewhere safe to heal." Jim thought of the scared, stumbling woman he'd found on the prairie, and the strong, fierce soul she'd become. "Reckon we've learned a thing or two about healing and about fighting back," Sarah added. "About choosing what's right, no matter the cost." He nodded slowly. "A sanctuary then, and if needed, a place to find justice. Together. Their marriage certificate caught the last light through the cabin window, new ink gleaming like promises kept. Outside, the land stretched wide and open, ready for whatever they would build upon it. They had fought their way through darkness to find each other. Now, it was time to bring some light back into the world. 1 year later, the family photograph hung in pride of place above the ranch house's new fireplace. It showed Jim and Sarah on their front porch, surrounded by the faces of their growing family, not by blood, but by choice. There was young Tommy, a runaway from an abusive home, now learning to train horses with a gentle hand. Mary Chen, whose family's store had been burned out by land grabbers until Jim and Sarah helped her take it back. Old Jake, a former lawman who'd lost his way until he found purpose again helping others. The ranch had grown too. New buildings dotted the property, a bunkhouse for travelers needing shelter, a barn twice the size of the original, gardens bursting with summer vegetables. The sign at the entrance now read, "Hawkins Mitchell Ranch, all who seek justice welcome." Sarah stood at the window, one hand resting on her swelling belly, as she watched Jim teaching Tommy to rope. Her father's Bible and Lucy's cross still held, places of honor on the mantel, but they were memories now, not wounds. "Mail's here!" Mary called from outside, including a letter from Marshal Phillips. Sarah opened it eagerly, reading aloud as Jim and Tommy came in from their lesson. Judge Blackwood's testimony led to 15 more arrests, 3 corrupt judges, 2 territorial governors, even a senator. She smiled grimly. The gang's former. Empire is being divided up, lands returned to their rightful owners. "Good news travels fast," Jim said, hanging up his hat. "Had word from Wade too. 2 more families heading our way, needing help getting back on their feet." "We'll make room," Sarah said simply. It was what they did now. Made room, made hope, made justice happen one soul at a time. Tommy brought in the rest of the mail, including a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a letter from Marshal Cooper in Denver, along with something that made Sarah's breath catch, a shiny new marshal's badge. "They're reopening the old cases," she read from Cooper's letter. "Jim's name has been cleared completely. They want to reinstate his commission if he wants it." Jim took the badge, its silver surface catching the afternoon light. "Lot of water under that bridge. Could do good work," Sarah said carefully. "Help more people." He studied the badge a moment longer, then smiled. "Reckon I'm already doing that right here." The badge went into a drawer, not forgotten, but not needed anymore. They had built something better than any official position could offer, a place where justice and mercy met, where broken souls could heal and find their strength again. Sarah wrapped her arms around her husband, feeling their child move between them. "Happy?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her softly. "Though I still owe you that ocean." "Soon," she promised. "Once the baby comes. I hear California's nice in the spring." Outside, more riders were approaching, Wade's men escorting the new families Sarah had been expecting. Time to welcome more souls to their growing sanctuary. Young Tommy ran out to greet them, Mary close behind, with offers of food and rest. Old Jake emerged from the bunkhouse, ready to help with horses and belongings. Jim and Sarah stood in their doorway watching, their family grow larger by the day. The photograph above their fireplace would need updating soon, but that was fine. Good things were meant to grow. "Your father would be proud," Jim said softly. "Both our families would." Sarah touched Lucy's cross at her throat, then her father's, Bible on the mantel. "They're still with us, in everything we build here." The sun was setting over their land, painting the world in shades of possibility. They had fought through darkness to reach this place, this moment, had found each other in the shadows and built something bright. Together, they walked out to welcome the new arrivals, ready to help more souls find their way home. Behind them, the family photograph caught the last light of day, a testament to love's power to heal, to rebuild, to begin again. Some things were worth fighting for, some things were worth building, some things, like the love between a lonely cowboy and a brave young woman, were worth every step of the journey. Together they had found their justice. Together they had found their peace. Together they had found their home.